He was the man with the velvet voice. An actor who could play a romantic hero one day and a sinister villain the next. James Mason was adored by audiences worldwide, yet his personal life was filled with turmoil, scandals, and heartbreak. From his early struggles in Britain to Hollywood stardom, and from turbulent marriages to his unforgettable performances in A Star Is Born and Lolita, this is the fascinating life story of James Mason.
Congratulations, my dear. I made it just in time, didn't I? May I borrow the end of your speech to make a speech of my own? I had my speech all prepared, but it's gone right out of my head. Let me see. Well, I need a job now. We'll play something, somebody.
Norman, darling.
Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to Sajjad Classic for more untold stories of Hollywood's golden era. James Neville Mason entered the world on the 15th of May, 1909, in Huddersfield, Yorkshire, into a family of privilege and prosperity. His father, John Mason, had built a successful business in the textile trade, and young James grew up in a household where comfort was never in short supply. But wealth and family expectations did not shape his destiny. His path would be very different from the one his parents had imagined. From an early age, James was surrounded by refinement. His parents enrolled him at Marlborough College, one of England's most prestigious schools, where discipline and tradition ruled. Though he was a bright student, he didn't show much interest in the business world his father hoped he would inherit. Instead, James was drawn to books, art, and the quiet power of words. When he entered Cambridge University, it was not to study drama, but architecture, a profession that promised stability and respectability. Yet fate had other plans. Within the grand halls of Cambridge, James discovered the Marlowe Dramatic Society, one of the university's most celebrated theatrical groups. The moment he stepped onto the stage, something ignited within him. Audiences at Cambridge were immediately struck by his presence. His tall frame, piercing gaze, and above all that velvety, commanding voice gave him an authority rare in a young actor. Critics and fellow students alike noticed that when James spoke, the room seemed to grow still, as if every word carried weight. It became clear that architecture would never hold his heart the way acting already had. Eager to polish his craft, Mason took a brief turn at the Old Vic Theatre School in London, where some of Britain's finest actors trained. But unlike many who relied on years of formal instruction, Mason quickly proved that his instincts were his greatest teacher. He had an ability to project intensity without raising his voice, to command attention with the smallest gesture. From these beginnings, in the classrooms of Cambridge and the rehearsal halls of the Old Vic, James Mason's journey toward the screen had quietly but unmistakably begun. James Mason's first steps into cinema came with the little-known crime drama Late Extra in 1935. It was a modest beginning, just another quota quickie churned out to satisfy British film regulations. Mason's part was small, but the camera didn't lie. Even in a brief role, his brooding features and smooth, commanding voice hinted at the potential of a leading man. For the rest of the decade, Mason paid his dues, appearing in minor roles across the British film industry. He wasn't yet a star, but he was quietly honing his craft, learning how to let silence, restraint, and that unique voice of his do as much work as a grand gesture. Then came the war. When the Second World War broke out, Mason made a decision that would stir up public controversy. He refused military service, declaring himself a conscientious objector. Many in Britain viewed this as unpatriotic, even cowardly. For a lesser actor, such a stigma could have ended a career before it truly began. But Mason was no ordinary performer. If anything, the controversy only added to his aura, an enigmatic figure who seemed to exist slightly apart from the ordinary world. His true breakthrough arrived in the early 1940s with the so-called Gainsborough melodramas, lavish costume dramas filled with passion, betrayal, and brooding intensity. Mason quickly became their star attraction. By the end of the decade, Mason was no longer just another actor. He was Britain's most bankable male star. His mix of sophistication, menace, and emotional intensity made him irresistible to audiences. It wasn't long before Hollywood took notice, and soon the biggest film industry in the world came knocking at his door. In 1943, James Mason delivered one of the performances that would define his early career. His role as the cold and ruthless Lord Rohan in The Man in Grey.
This one time you will tell me the truth. You murdered her, didn't you? Didn't you?
Rowan, listen!
You killed a Rowan. Who dishonors us, dies. I'll not leave that heritage to my son. But you're not going to escape.
This wasn't the type of leading man audiences were used to. He wasn't gallant or tender. He was a cruel, brooding aristocrat who treated women with contempt and violence. From the moment Mason appeared on screen, there was an unsettling magnetism about him. His Lord Rohan is a man of wealth and power, but completely devoid of compassion. In one infamous scene, he beats his own dog in a fit of rage, a shocking moment that left audiences both appalled and riveted. Yet, beneath the brutality, Mason brought a dark allure, a charisma that made it impossible to turn away. Critics at the time recognized that this was no ordinary villain. The Manchester Guardian remarked that Mason managed to be menacing without ever raising his voice, noting how his quiet authority gave the character more weight than melodramatic outbursts ever could. The Times described his performance as unnervingly magnetic, praising the way Mason turned what could have been a cardboard villain into something disturbingly real. And audiences responded in kind. While The Man in Grey was filled with sweeping romance, betrayal, and passion, Mason's cruelty became the film's most unforgettable element. It was, in many ways, the role that transformed him from a rising actor into a full-fledged star. A little trivia adds to the film's legacy. The Man in Grey was part of the Gainsborough melodramas, a series of wartime costume dramas that provided escapism for British audiences weary of the Blitz. While the rest of the world was focused on the grim realities of war, Mason's performance gave cinema-goers a different kind of darkness to lose themselves in. A villain so compelling, he became irresistible. For Mason, this film was more than just another credit. It was the beginning of a screen persona that would follow him throughout his career. The sophisticated, soft-spoken man whose charm was edged with danger. The Seventh Veil, 1945.
I won't!
I said, how old are you?
17.
Exactly. Until you're 21, you're in my care. I'm your guardian, your legal guardian. Do you understand what that means?
No.
It means that you can't marry without my consent. You can't even leave this house without my permission. If you do, I can have you brought back by the police if necessary. And go to bed.
After The Man in Grey had established James Mason as a star, he quickly followed it with a role that would elevate him into international recognition. The Seventh Veil, 1945. Here Mason played Nicholas, a stern, domineering guardian who takes in his orphaned cousin Francesca, a gifted pianist. Nicholas's control over her life is absolute. What she plays, how she lives, and ultimately, whom she can love. His obsession is chilling, yet Mason played it with such restraint that audiences were both repulsed and fascinated. Unlike the flamboyant villains of the time, Mason gave Nicholas an icy psychological edge. His calm authority and quiet menace made him far more terrifying than a shouting tyrant ever could. You never see him explode. Instead, his words carry the weight of command, leaving Francesca and the audience trapped in his shadow. The Times of London praised Mason for imbuing the role with a subtle cruelty that lingers long after the film ends. Meanwhile, American critics admired his ability to bring layers of humanity to a man who could have been a flat caricature. They noted how his Nicholas wasn't just a villain, he was a man torn between love and control, compassion and possession. And audiences responded in droves. The Seventh Veil became the biggest British box office hit of 1945, even surpassing Hollywood imports in popularity. It also won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay, giving the film international prestige. Trivia: Mason wasn't even the first choice for the role. Producers initially considered casting someone with more traditional romantic appeal. But once Mason stepped into the part, his blend of menace and magnetic charm became so effective that critics began calling him Britain's first true romantic anti-hero. For Mason, this role wasn't just another success. It was the film that transformed him from a rising star into a household name, setting the stage for his leap to Hollywood. Odd Man Out, 1947.
Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not charity, I am become a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. Though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains and have not charity.
In Odd Man Out, 1947, James Mason gave what many still call the defining performance of his British career. He stepped into the role of Johnny McQueen, an Irish revolutionary who, after a botched robbery, is left wounded and stumbling through the cold, shadowed streets of Belfast. What makes Mason's portrayal unforgettable is the way he captured a man unraveling, not only from the physical pain of his injury, but from the heavy weight of guilt, fear, and fading hope. Each movement is slower than the last, every glance carrying both desperation and a quiet dignity, as though Johnny knows he is nearing the end, but refuses to surrender his humanity. Critics were deeply moved by Mason's work. They saw in Johnny McQueen something rare, a character who wasn't just a fugitive but a tragic figure, worn down by ideals and circumstance. Mason didn't play him as a traditional hero or villain. Instead, he gave the audience a man caught in the in-between, struggling to cling to life as the city itself seems to close in on him. The performance was so powerful that it earned Mason the Best Actor award at the Venice Film Festival, and the film itself won the first BAFTA for Best British Film, cementing its place as a classic. The Upturned Glass, 1947.
Mr. Michael Joyce. He was well thought of in the medical profession, and his marriage had been an unhappy one, and he'd lived apart from his wife for several years. Consequently, he threw all his energy and interest into his work. As a brain specialist, he operated in 3 London hospitals. He was reserved in his personal relationships and had no close friends. His only relaxation was to sit at home and play the piano. But he never recognized this himself until he met a woman called Emma Wright.
In The Upturned Glass, 1947, James Mason stepped into the skin of Dr. Michael Joyce, a respected neurosurgeon whose ordered world unravels when obsession takes hold. What begins as a tale of a man of science slowly shifts into something darker, romance, jealousy, and vengeance bleeding together until reason itself seems to collapse. Mason guided the audience through this descent with unnerving precision, allowing glimpses of tenderness that made his eventual violence all the more disturbing. Critics admired the film's moody, psychological tension and singled out Mason's performance as the anchor holding it together. Rather than playing Joyce as a straightforward villain, he shaped him into a man both sympathetic and terrifying, torn between intellect and passion. The monthly film bulletin praised his quiet intensity and noted how his restraint made the final moments hit harder. For many, Mason elevated what might have been a standard thriller into something unsettlingly poetic, a meditation on love, madness, and the fragility of control. The Reckless Moment, 1949.
There's the police. They'll be looking for the one who killed Darby. Now, if they should see those letters... I understand you can't talk. Look now, I just called to tell you that he won't wait till Wednesday. He wants the money no later than Monday.
In The Reckless Moment, 1949, James Mason stepped into the role of Martin Donnelly, a suave yet menacing blackmailer whose presence lingers like a shadow over every frame. Unlike the fiery villains he had played in earlier British melodramas, here Mason delivered something subtler, quietly dangerous, with a streak of charm that left audiences torn between fear and fascination. Donnelly is drawn into the world of Joan Bennett's desperate mother, and instead of remaining a cold-hearted criminal, Mason shaded him with unexpected sympathy.
Police know who killed Darby. They've taken him in.
What?
It's no bother of yours. He's nothing. You're out of it now. Don't you see? You're out of it. You're safe.
But he's innocent.
All right, he's innocent of this, but he's guilty of 100 other things, so it doesn't matter. It makes no difference.
Allowing moments of vulnerability to slip through the cracks of his menace. Critics admired the restraint he brought to the role. Where another actor might have leaned into melodrama, Mason underplayed, creating a chilling realism that heightened the film's tension. The New York Times remarked on his magnetic stillness, praising how his measured voice and piercing gaze gave the character a dangerous elegance. Many saw his performance as proof of his versatility, able to be both threatening and strangely empathetic, often within the same scene. It was this complexity that set Mason apart, and in the reckless moment, he turned what could have been a straightforward noir role into a layered portrait of a man caught between menace and moral awakening.
Price is £20,000. English pounds sterling.
To my knowledge, no spy in history has ever been paid £20,000 for any information.
No spy in history has had to sell what I have to sell.
5 Fingers, 1952. In this film, Mason plays Ulysses Diello, a suave British embassy official turned spy for the Germans during World War II. With layered subtlety, he walks the tightrope between patriot and traitor, infusing every glance and hesitation with moral weight and heartbreaking regret. Critics and fans alike laud it as one of Mason's greatest turns. His nuanced portrayal of duplicity and inner conflict cements this film as a spy classic and a showcase of Mason's range. Based on real events, 5 Fingers stands out not only for its spycraft, but for Mason's ability to humanize a deeply flawed protagonist, making us sympathize even while we condemn.
It is indeed. In fact, I ask it myself every morning while I'm shaving. I say, mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the greatest star of them all? Do you know what the mirror answers?
Norman May.
Absolutely correct, Miss,
Blodgett, Esther Blodgett.
A Star is Born, 1954. In A Star is Born, 1954, James Mason gave one of the most heartbreaking performances of his career, stepping into the role of Norman Maine, the once great movie star whose brilliance is slowly eroded by alcoholism and fading relevance. It was a role that demanded both grandeur and vulnerability, and Mason delivered both in devastating measure. With his aristocratic poise and unmistakable voice, he conveyed Norman's old-world charm. But beneath the polished surface, you could see the cracks widening, his pride battling his shame, his love for Judy Garland's Esther caught in the same downward spiral that would eventually destroy him. Critics hailed Mason's performance as one of the finest of the decade. The New York Times praised the elegant despair he brought to Norman, noting how he avoided melodrama and instead embodied a tragic inevitability. Garland's powerhouse singing may have been the emotional heartbeat of the film, but Mason was its shadow, the fading echo of Hollywood glamour turned into tragedy. Both were nominated for Academy Awards, though neither won, a decision many film historians still call one of the Academy's greatest oversights. A little trivia makes the story even richer. The role of Norman Maine had originally been intended for Cary Grant, who turned it down. Mason, stepping in, made it entirely his own, to the point where it's difficult to imagine anyone else capturing the same mix of dignity and ruin. His chemistry with Garland was so palpable that many believed it blurred into reality, reflecting not just the film's tragic romance, but the real pressures of Hollywood stardom. For Mason, A Star is Born was more than a triumph. It was proof that he could carry not just British melodramas or European art films, but the weight of a great Hollywood tragedy. It remains to this day one of the towering achievements of his career.
My secretary is a great admirer of your methods, Mr. Kaplan. Elusiveness, however misguided.
Wait a minute. Wait. Did you call me Kaplan?
I know you're a man of many names, but I'm perfectly willing to accept your current choice.
North by Northwest, 1959. In North by Northwest, 1959, James Mason showed the world just how effortlessly he could slip into the skin of a villain, and not the usual snarling, heavy-handed type, but something far more refined and unnerving. As Philip Van Damme, the smooth-talking spy who pursues Cary Grant's Roger Thornhill across America, Mason radiated menace with nothing more than a calm smile and a carefully chosen word. His villainy was polished, his threats delivered with the elegance of a man offering you a glass of wine while plotting your demise. Critics immediately singled him out as one of Hitchcock's finest antagonists. The New Yorker admired Mason's ability to make evil seem urbane and almost civilized, while others pointed out how his restrained menace made the film's suspense all the more unbearable. Cary Grant, famously suave himself, suddenly had a mirror image in Mason, two men of charm and wit, but one with warmth and humor, the other with icy calculation. Trivia makes Van Damme's character even more intriguing. Hitchcock reportedly instructed Mason to play the role as if he were the most polite assassin in the world, and Mason delivered exactly that. His chemistry with Eva Marie Saint, who played Van Damme's mistress, added an unexpected layer of sophistication, even suggesting that danger could be seductive. Mason himself later admitted he enjoyed playing Van Damme more than many of his noble roles, because the villain gave him room to be witty, sinister, and magnetic all at once. The Mount Rushmore climax has become one of the most iconic in cinema, but it's Mason's understated performance throughout that makes the stakes feel so high. Without his poised menace, Cary Grant's desperate scramble would lose much of its tension. Mason didn't need to chase. He simply lingered like a shadow, reminding the audience that real danger often whispers rather than shouts.
But we could leave this place, perhaps. Yes, there's nothing to keep us here. We haven't any obligations here. We don't owe rent to anybody. We could just pack up our bags. Tonight, we could go now. I could take you for a wonderful trip around the country.
Lolita, 1962. When Lolita, 1962, arrived in cinemas, it was already burdened with controversy. Vladimir Nabokov's novel about an older man's obsession with a teenage girl had been deemed scandalous, and many doubted it could even be adapted for the screen. But James Mason, cast as Professor Humbert Humbert, delivered a performance so layered that it transformed what could have been pure provocation into something disturbingly human. Mason didn't play Humbert as a grotesque monster. Instead, he imbued him with charm, vulnerability, and self-delusion. That was precisely what made the performance unsettling. He coaxed the audience to understand Humbert's madness, even as they recoiled from it. His polished diction, his quivering restraint, his moments of tortured longing. Mason turned obsession into poetry, and in doing so made the taboo narrative both hypnotic and unbearable to watch. Critics were divided, which only fueled the film's notoriety. The New York Times marveled at Mason's ability to make Humbert a tragic fool rather than a lecherous villain, while others accused the performance of being too sympathetic. What no one denied was that Mason carried the film with an intensity few other actors could have dared to bring. His portrayal pushed boundaries of what audiences were prepared to confront on screen in the early 1960s. Trivia gives the story extra spice. Mason wasn't Kubrick's first choice. Both Laurence Olivier and David Niven were considered, but Kubrick felt Mason's mix of elegance and unease made him perfect. On set, Mason was famously patient with Sue Lyon, the teenage actress playing Lolita, coaching her through scenes with the gentleness of a protective uncle, even while portraying a man obsessed with her. Ironically, Mason had initially turned down the part, fearing it too scandalous for his career, only to later admit that Humbert Humbert became one of the defining roles of his life. The legacy of Lolita rests heavily on Mason's shoulders. Without his ability to balance menace with pathos, the film would likely have collapsed under its own controversy. Instead, he made audiences question not just Humbert, but themselves. why they couldn't look away from him even when they knew they should. By the 1960s, James Mason had settled into a fascinating stage of his career. No longer the brooding leading man of the Gainsborough melodramas, he had matured into one of cinema's most reliable character actors, an actor whose presence alone lent sophistication to any production.
I want you to be my mistress.
Georgie Girl, 1966. In Georgie Girl, 1966, he took on the role of James Leamington, a wealthy middle-aged man infatuated with a much younger woman. It was the kind of part that could easily have been played as shallow or distasteful, yet Mason gave it complexity, suggesting both a man clinging to fading youth and a figure trapped by his own loneliness. Audiences and critics alike admired how he balanced charm with melancholy. The 1970s brought him to international thrillers and Hollywood prestige projects. In The Boys from Brazil, 1978, Mason played Edward Seibert, a ruthless ex-Nazi doctor working alongside Gregory Peck's Josef Mengele. Though surrounded by larger-than-life performances, Mason's icy restraint made him genuinely unsettling. That same year, in Heaven Can Wait, he turned to a very different register, playing Mr. Jordan, the calm, wise guide of the afterlife. The serenity and quiet wit he brought to the part earned him an Academy Award nomination, proof that Mason's versatility had only deepened with time. Beyond his most celebrated performances, James Mason delivered memorable turns in several other films, proving his versatility and commanding presence across genres and eras. In Julius Caesar, 1953, Mason took on the towering role of Brutus, the conflicted assassin of Caesar. His portrayal was dignified and restrained, capturing Brutus's moral torment rather than turning him into a cold conspirator. Critics admired Mason's ability to humanize a historical figure so often painted in black and white, calling his Brutus one of the most thoughtful screen interpretations of Shakespeare. A decade later, in The Fall of the Roman Empire, 1964, he played Timonides, a wise and humane Greek freedman. Here, Mason stood out in an epic filled with spectacle, giving audiences a character of quiet intelligence and moral strength. Reviewers noted that while the film itself struggled at the box office, Mason's performance brought depth and gravitas to the sprawling historical drama. Equally notable was his turn in The Desert Fox, 1951, where he portrayed German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. Mason balanced military brilliance with personal conflict, offering a performance that critics praised for its nuance and refusal to paint Rommel as a mere villain. Many felt he gave the role rare humanity, making it one of the finest war film portrayals of its era. Television also gave him a second home. He became a fixture in mini-series and dramas, where his gravitas translated beautifully to the small screen. His performance in The Last Place on Earth and his Emmy-nominated role in A Delicate Balance showed how effortlessly he could carry complex material, while his narration for documentaries like The London Nobody Knows displayed the unmistakable authority of his voice. For audiences, Mason's TV appearances were like masterclasses in controlled, intelligent acting, proof that his star power was not confined to the cinema screen. James Mason's personal life often mirrored the intensity of his screen roles, passionate, stormy, and full of conflict. In 1941, at the height of his rising stardom, he married actress Pamela Calino. At first, the union looked like the perfect pairing of two glamorous personalities. They lived in style, surrounded by the trappings of success, and soon had two children, Morgan and Portland. But beneath the surface, their marriage was a battlefield. Pamela was known for her extravagance and strong will, while Mason, though outwardly composed, was often restless and unfaithful. Their home life became a stage for constant quarrels, jealousy, and wounded pride. By the 1950s, the cracks were impossible to hide. Friends recalled tense dinner parties where arguments spilled into the open, and the tabloids eagerly picked up whispers of Mason's affairs and Pamela's lavish spending. What could have remained private soon became public scandal. When the marriage finally collapsed in 1964, it did so with bitterness that shocked even Hollywood. Legal battles dragged on over money and custody, and both sides accused the other of betrayal. For Mason, it was one of the most turbulent off-screen dramas of his life. Yet he was not destined to remain alone. In 1971, Mason married again, this time to Australian actress Clarissa Kay. Their relationship was quieter, steadier, and far less public. Unlike Pamela, Clarissa was more reserved, and the couple found comfort in each other's company away from the glare of Hollywood. Mason, who had endured so much turbulence in his first marriage, finally seemed to have found a measure of peace. They stayed together until his death, proving that even the most restless souls can discover calm in their later years. James Mason was no stranger to controversy, both on and off the screen, and much of it seemed to follow the same thread as his acting, elegant on the surface but simmering with conflict beneath. During World War II, while many of his contemporaries put on uniforms, Mason made a deeply personal and unpopular choice. He declared himself a conscientious objector, refusing to take up arms. To him, it was a moral stand, but to the British public, locked in a fight for survival, it looked like betrayal. Newspapers hinted at cowardice, and critics branded him unpatriotic. Yet Mason stood firm, never apologizing for a decision he felt was guided by principle rather than fear. His private life, too, offered its share of headlines. When his marriage to Pamela Mason collapsed in 1964, the separation became more spectacle than personal heartbreak. Pamela was bold, outspoken, and armed with accusations of his infidelities. The divorce battle spilled into the press, with the glamorous facade of their union stripped away to reveal bitterness, betrayal, and greed. Pamela ultimately walked away with a lavish settlement, leaving Mason to endure whispers about the darker side of his charm. Then came Lolita, 1962. If the public thought they had seen scandal from Mason before, Kubrick's adaptation of Nabokov's novel pushed the boundaries further. Mason took on the role of Humbert, a middle-aged man obsessively drawn to a young girl, a character as repulsive as he was fascinating. The subject matter was explosive, so much so that many feared the film would be banned outright. Yet Mason's restrained, deeply unsettling performance prevented it from collapsing under outrage. Critics noted how he avoided cheap sensationalism, instead making Humbert tragically pathetic, a man consumed by weakness rather than monstrous evil. It was a role that might have destroyed another actor, but for Mason, it cemented his reputation as someone willing to take risks, even if it meant courting scandal. Despite health issues later in life, Mason continued working steadily, admired for his professionalism and craft. His career spanned more than 130 films over 5 decades, making him one of the most versatile and respected actors of his era. James Mason died on 27 July 1984 in Lausanne, Switzerland, from a heart attack. He was 75 years old. His ashes were initially interred near his home in Switzerland, but later, at his widow's request, they were moved to Switzerland's Corsier-sur-Vevey cemetery, near his friend Charlie Chaplin. James Mason remains one of Britain's greatest actors, sophisticated, magnetic, and unforgettable. His velvet voice and ability to embody both villains and tragic heroes secured his place in cinema history. Though his personal life was turbulent, his work continues to inspire actors and captivate audiences around the world. What's your favorite James Mason performance? A Star is Born, Lolita, or perhaps North by Northwest? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Sajad Classic for more timeless stories from Hollywood's golden age.